Hello, everyone. This is Kristina Mandlakiani, co-founder of Mind Valley and the host of Mind Valley Book Club. Today, my guest is Paul Rice. Welcome, Paul, to Mind Valley.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
We're actually discussing this wonderful book, Every Purchase Matters. And since I was on the trip, I actually got to read it quietly and peacefully without interruptions because, planes are perfect for reading books. But before we go into the book, I want to give you a brief bio for my guest, because my guest is truly very remarkable. So Paul Rice, apart from being, the pioneer in conscious entrepreneurship, you're also the founder of Fair Trade USA, which was founded in 1998. And since then, Fair Trade USA has more than 1,700 brands, licensed as Fair Trade brands. Fair Trade USA has generated $1.2 billion in financial impact for more than 1 million farmers and workers from 70 countries, which are remarkable numbers, of course. In addition to that, Paul Rice is an award-winning, entrepreneur, but I also consider you a scientist because of all the research that you put in your work. Paul Rice was also named by the World Economic Forum the Social Entrepreneur of the Year, and Paul has dedicated his life to ethical business practices and to alleviating poverty through ethical business practices. But more than that, actually, the trade process. I'm sorry if I butchered this last part because this is probably very significant. Paul, did
You're
I
doing
miss
great.
something?
Christina, you're doing great.
Thank you. Thank you. And we're going to talk about the book, Every Purchase Matters. And before we go into the book, I hope that you guys had a chance to get it, because I believe that those people who watch the interviews, they are interested in the topic. Considering that my background, I found this book very fascinating. It actually covers a lot of different aspects and nuances of the business practices of the way business is done currently in our world. And I guess the first question that I want to ask Paul is, in broad strokes, this book is about the way capitalism works right now, and the way you envision that conscious capitalism should be working, because obviously we don't have any other system to talk about. So could we start with maybe your personal relationship with that? Because I know that you had your swinging relationship with capitalism through the years.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, thanks, Christina. Thank you for that warm welcome and those kind words. It's great to be here, and I feel a connection to your audience and to this community. And I was really looking forward to being in conversation with you today. And my relationship with capitalism has been an interesting journey, shall we say. I grew up hearing stories about my grandfather's farm. My mother grew up on a farm in Oklahoma during the Great Depression. My grandfather was a cotton picker, and life was hard. And so from a very early age, hearing those stories, I had a deep sense of connection to the people who grow our food, to the people who make it possible for us to eat. And that connection and that empathy for farmers led me out of the university when I was 22 to go to Nicaragua. Nicaragua at the time was doing some interesting things with farmers and bringing farmers together into cooperatives so that they could farm more productively. And so I went thinking I would stay for a year or two, and I stayed for 11 years. So I was 22 when I went away. I was 33 when I came home. Incredibly formative years for me. I lived way up in the mountains, where you could only reach the villages on horseback. It was a great adventure. I was working with coffee farmers. And, at that time, my perspective on capitalism and on the market was that capitalism was the problem. Because what I observed was small coffee farmers who were working so hard to grow coffee and to produce as much as they could, but they were isolated from the market. And so no matter how much coffee they produced, they were always selling at a very low price, paid by middlemen who would come up into the villages with a pickup truck and say, okay, today's price for coffee is 3 cents a pound, take it or leave it, right? And so my observation was that the market was failing these
Mhm.
small farmers, and that the market was the problem. And years later, I heard about fair trade, very much by accident. There was a small fair trade, very nascent movement here in the United States. Fair trade was growing quickly in Europe. So once again, Europe kind of showing the way in terms of enlightenment. And the slogan of the fair traders was trade, not aid.
Mhm.
Trade, not aid. And so the philosophy was farmers don't need our charity. They just need a fair price for their harvest and for all their hard work. And so that really shifted my thinking from seeing capitalism as the enemy to seeing markets and capitalism and companies and consumers like you and me as potential allies in
Mhm.
an effort to lift farmers out of poverty. And so that was kind of the beginning of my ideological shift.
Mhm. So, for those of you who are watching not from US, I've read from the book actually that nearly 70% of American consumers recognize the brand of USA, Fair Trade USA, which is amazing. It's it's literally it's mind blowing. Uh, Now back to our conversation. When I was a student and I studied in Europe, and
Mm,
Europeans are a little bit more revolutionary when it comes to capitalism,
mm.
maybe because we have very long history of turbulent discussions about social issues. So
Yeah.
I heard quite a lot of people saying that capitalism is a horrible thing and that's the worst thing that can happen to us. Then, on the other hand, in the USA, the sentiment is very different because US is probably one of the most strikingly capitalist countries. But
Yeah.
also my background, I was born in Soviet Union and raised in Soviet Union. I actually
Mhm.
appreciate capitalism because I know the other side of it, of
Mhm.
the absence of capitalism and free
Yeah.
markets in essence.
Yeah.
So the question that I want to ask, since you've dedicated all your life to that field, why is it that we are so polarized on that question? And
Mm.
it looks like there are just extremes. Capitalism is the worst thing or capitalism is the best thing, but there is no discussion what could be the healthy kind of economic relationship in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree that the conversation, and it seems like all conversations these days, are quite polarized. Um, and I'm curious about that, why we are living through a time when dialogue and compromise seems so elusive, right? Why are we living in a time of such extreme polarization of ideas and positions and politics, as we speak? War is gathering in the Middle East, and countries are kind of ripping themselves apart over immigration and other issues. I mean, it's a sad time for the globe, and I don't understand the polarization, but I have seen, Christina, in this conversation over capitalism versus socialism, or capitalism versus corporate greed capitalism, the
Mhm.
old version, the extractive, exploitative version of capitalism versus a kinder, gentler, more compassionate and stakeholder oriented version of capitalism. I have seen the emergence of a movement, and I've very much been a part of that. Fair trade has very much been a part of that. And I think it's rooted in the realization that everyday consumers like you and me see the world, see the world's problems, and want to make a difference. And so we see our purchasing decisions as a way for us to express our values
Mhm.
by choosing products that are more sustainable. And so that in turn is creating a flywheel, if you will, a process of momentum with companies who are listening to consumers and saying, oh, my consumers want organic products, or they want fair trade products, they want more sustainable products, we're going to respond. And so there's a dynamic there where within the capitalist system, within market economies, we're able to create incredible social and environmental good. And that's very inspiring to me. And for me, going back to my origin story in Nicaragua, hearing about fair trade led me to start the first fair trade coffee co-op in Nicaragua in 1990. And I was the general manager of that co-op for 4 years. So I had a chance during that 4-year period to organize more than 3,000 small family farmers, farmers with maybe 1 hectare or 2 hectares of land each. So very, very poor, who by themselves were the victims of money lenders and unscrupulous middlemen, but who, standing together as a community, were able to create a viable export business. So they had the volume as a community to process their coffee, to export direct, to jump over the middlemen, and to get a fabulous price from the fair trade buyers in Europe for their coffee. And that in turn, by virtue of that extra money that we were receiving, we were able to keep our kids in school. We were able to run health programs and vaccinate the kids in our communities and do malaria vaccinations. We were able to reforest areas that had been clear cut by transnational lumber companies a generation earlier. We were able to transition to organics. We were able to start women's banking programs so that women entrepreneurs had access to their own economic independence. We did all of these really amazing things with the money that was coming in from fair trade sales. And none of this was thanks to the charity of the government or some international agency. It was a market-based approach, right? And so for me, what illuminated me in that 4-year journey was, markets can be a force for good. They're not always a force for good, but they can be a force for good. They can be a way to empower poor people on a journey out of poverty. And so that was, for me, in my book, I call it my capitalist epiphany, where I went from from hating capitalism to realizing, no, there's actually opportunity for consciousness, for liberation, for progress within capitalist system. And that led me to move back to the United States and start Fair Trade USA 26 years ago here in the US.
Well, I guess it also gives you the chance to help many more people than just being in Nicaragua in the grassroots. So for people who haven't yet read the book, it is a very exciting journey through years and through the evolution of conscious consumption and also conscious production, probably, and retail as well. So it actually covers quite a lot of interesting dynamics, not just in coffee, but in the second half of the book, Paul actually dives into all other industries and touches upon some industries which were very curious for me, because I lived in Asia for 16 years. So some of them,
Wow.
I was hoping that, that you'd have better news for me, but unfortunately, we're still far from solving all our problems. So since you mentioned that as well,
We're making progress. We're making
yes.
progress.
Yeah, for those of you who are curious but also overwhelmed, because it is natural when we think about the humanities problems, especially if we think about our environmental problems, it is overwhelming. So the good thing about this book, it's very hopeful, and what I really appreciate about your approach, not to the book per se, but to your work, was this adaptability and openness to hear the sides which were opposite to yours. So with that. Actually, maybe I'll leave that question to later, because I have one very pressing question that I want to ask you. But first, you mentioned the trade versus aid, and not as an aid is not needed, but how much evidence is there that I think our relationship with money, just monetary aid, is complex. A lot of the times it's guilt rooted. But part of fair trade is actually also those premiums, which are in essence aid, monetary aid. So how as a humanity, how do we have to find the balance? Because there's also this rhetoric that there's so much money in the rich world that if we just gave like a portion, we'd solve all the problems. Is that how it works, or does it require a little bit? Is it more complex, as you like to say in the book?
I've both read the literature on consumer behavior and consumers' willingness and interest in buying the performance of the fair trade market, which, as you pointed out, now is quite mainstream, both in Europe and the United States. I mean, here in the United States, we work with all the major retailers from Whole Foods and Kroger and Safeway and Target to Costco and Walmart even. And so you can find fair trade products with that fair trade certified label everywhere. And why? Then the question is why? Why has corporate America, why has corporate Europe embraced this model? Why are consumers buying it? As consumers, most people want to think of themselves as good people. You actually alluded to this in your little teaser video, introducing this conversation a couple of days ago. Most of us want to feel belonging. We want to feel connection to our family, to our community, to the world. We don't want to feel like because of the chocolate bar that we chose, a child was working in the fields. We don't want to believe that our coffee led to the deforestation of the rainforest, right? We want to do no harm. We want to feel like we're good people. We want to feel like our lifestyle at least doesn't make the world worse. But the problems are overwhelming. Global poverty and climate change. What can we do? We're so small. What power do we have? Right? The news is full of stories of the powerful, the billionaires and the presidents. And I think many of us feel like we don't have power to impact these big global problems. And yet we do. We do. Because every time we go to the store, we have a chance to vote for a better world through the products that we buy. Right? Our purchasing decisions are a way to vote for a better world, to advance social and environmental progress. And companies are listening, right? So you don't have to wait until the next presidential election in your company to vote for change. You can vote for change today when you go to the store by choosing a fair trade product or a sustainable product of any kind. And so I think that feeling of empowerment, that feeling that we can make a difference, small but meaningful, and that collectively we can make a big difference as a movement of conscious consumers. I think that is what is driving the growth of conscious consumerism and the growth of fair trade and the growth of our movement as a whole. And most people, Kristina, are willing to pay a tiny bit more. So coming back to willingness to pay, you don't always have to. I mean, fair trade products aren't always more expensive. Sometimes they're at the same price. But when they are a little bit more, I think many consumers feel like, well, okay, I'll pay two cents more for a cup of coffee. But by doing that, I'm helping a family keep their kid in school. Like, what an amazing feeling. And so, in essence, it is a fair trade because of the emotional value, the sense of connection, the sense of belonging, the sense of being part of a higher consciousness in the world that we get as consumers. It's why I call my book Every Purchase Matters.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, think about that. Every purchase that you and I make is an opportunity to make a difference. Every purchase matters.
I actually agree that this book probably has the strongest message for the consumers. And you do have this one quote there, which I will loosely quote, that we sometimes underestimate how much we can influence the trajectory in which the capitalism will evolve. However, if you're an entrepreneur, and as an entrepreneur, I have to say that this book also gives you a lot of interesting material because, and I'm leading to this next question. So why do I, as a person who lives in Europe in an affluent country, I understand I'm also willing to pay like a little bit more for feeling better about myself. So I'll leave it, although it is actually a curious phenomenon. But I want to ask, why do companies, especially companies which are huge and are profit driven and who have shareholders, I've been in business for 20 years. I know how it works. Almost every entrepreneur will say, we are not in charity. I need profits. So why do they feel compelled to actually join and pay more for their, for whatever resources they're buying?
Yeah. Kristina, I love this question. And honestly, this is what I think about every day. As a social entrepreneur, it's what keeps me up at night. And also as the leader of a movement, it's what lights me up and makes me so happy, because what I'm seeing is an evolution of capitalism, an evolution of the business community in which they realize that doing things like fair trade are not just the right thing to do. Yeah, it's the right thing to take care of the farmers that grow our food. Yes, it's the right thing to take care of the environment, where that food is grown. Of course, it's the right thing to do. But there's also a business case. That's what makes me hopeful. That's what makes me so excited. There's a business case for sustainability. In other words, I think business leaders in the past had this kind of trade-off mentality. They thought, oh, we can be profitable, we can maximize returns for shareholders, or we can be responsible and sustainable as a company, but we can't be both. There's a contradiction there. There's a trade-off. And I think the new way of thinking for business leaders that, I get to work with these pioneers of a new chapter in the business world. Their thinking is, no, actually sustainability can drive profitability. Sustainability can make our company more successful. And so that's what's so exciting for me, is to see the business case and to realize that companies are not sacrificing their profits by joining fair trade. They actually see fair trade as a way to be more successful over the long term. So, I talk about enlightened self-interest, right? Companies are joining, businesses are joining the fair trade movement, and not just fair trade, but other expressions of ethical sourcing. Yes, because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's good for business.
I think it's from the human point of view, it's so obvious. And I like this one sentiment that you shared when you were talking about environment, that, sustainability, in essence, I mean, if we have no more people to sell to, if we destroy our planet, destroy our communities. But, what I wanted to ask, and you do mention other certification, other organizations which also certify, for example, organic or no animal cruelty, no MGO, and so on. And there are quite a lot of those. Those characteristics nowadays to the things that we consume. I remember when I was a student about 20 years ago, I came across the concept where every decision that we make has all sorts of different consequences. And sometimes when you think you're doing the best, for example, I drive an electric car because I like the fact that it's not polluting, but I hear left and right how bad it is to produce and all of that. So whatever choices you make, there will be someone who'll tell you, but did you know how bad this actually is? So what's your take on that? For us as consumers, you can, if you're a conscious consumer, you can really go crazy by trying to, not to make any harm anywhere at all. So what do you suggest?
Don't try and be perfect. That's my advice. Don't try and be perfect. It's impossible, because like you said, there's so many ripple effects from the decision. It's impossible right now to lead a completely 100% sustainable lifestyle. So we do what we can, and we celebrate the fact that we are on the right side of history, that we are part of a chapter in capitalism that will take 20 or 30 or 40 years. But in the future, these sustainable products will be the norm, not the exception. They'll be the norm. It will be easier and easier. It will be cheaper and cheaper to lead a more sustainable lifestyle. And I've seen that in the fair trade movement. When we started 26 years ago, we only certified coffee, and that premium was quite high. And fair trade coffee, the premium to the consumer, in other words, what the consumer was paying for fair trade was quite a bit higher than what they paid for non-fair trade. And it was only available in, certain kinds of stores that cater to natural and organic, and green consumers. Okay, fast forward to today. Here in the US, we have a mainstream fair trade movement where fair trade products, first of all, are cheaper. They're much more comparable to in terms of price to the price of a non-fair trade product. That's good. It's like democratizing sustainability. It makes it accessible to people of all income levels. Number one. Number two, it's available in every store now, even bargain stores like Walmart and so on. And then number three, the breadth of products we've gone from coffee to now literally thousands of different product categories, from asparagus and tea to clothing and dairy and seafood. And we certify all over the world, and we certify farms in Europe and in the US. Our vision is fair trade for all.
Yeah.
And it's the notion that fair trade should be accessible to any farm, to any factory, to any fisherman anywhere in the world. And so, before too long, fair trade iPhones. Why not? Fair trade everything, right? We as consumers, I think, want to access more sustainable products in all aspects of our life. It's going to take time. And so my advice is, don't get upset if you can't by and don't feel overwhelmed by all the choices. Just do what you can and celebrate those small acts of kindness and compassion for the world, and realize that you're powerful. We are powerful through our purchasing decisions. I've seen this so many times. Companies who were reluctant to join the sustainability movement, but they saw how consumers were moving, and they moved to follow those consumers. And now there's momentum, and they're doing more and more every year.
One thing which impressed me was how huge and the companies that you mentioned who have come to you to license their products. I did not expect some of those companies to see in those lists, because usually when we think about all those fair trade, organic, and and all those green things, we imagine like the small producers. Now you didn't mention the word green. And I was wondering if I had a quote from your book here, because I have a few quotes that I wanted to ask you about. But can we talk about greenwashing a little bit? How much of that is happening, and what do you think about that? And is that something to be concerned about?
Yeah. I talk about this in the book. It's a really interesting issue, because on the one hand, as a sustainability movement, we always want to protect our credibility, right, and the integrity of green products, of sustainability, of fair trade, and so on. But then on the other hand, we want to mainstream. We want to bring more companies into our movement. We want to make things like fair trade the new normal. And so obviously then there's a risk that companies will join the movement but not do very much, and try and portray themselves as greener than they really are. And that for me is greenwashing, when a company misrepresents what it's doing, when it tries to deceive consumers and make consumers think they're doing more than they really are. So we're very vigilant about that. We have, in our agreements with the companies that we work with, we get to approve all of their marketing content around fair trade. So no company will ever be able to say, oh, we're 100% fair trade, without us first reviewing that and looking at the numbers and validating that. Honestly, though, what I see is that companies are actually pretty shy about making public claims, because they know that consumers can smell bullshit. They know that we're looking for authenticity. They know that we will punish them by not buying their products if we smell a rat, if we smell a lack of authenticity. And so my experience actually has been that companies are pretty conservative in their claims, and that they only really talk about their fair trade program, for example, once it has reached a certain volume and a certain level. And so in the meantime, we allow companies to, as I say, dip their toe in the water, and prove that fair trade has a business case. So, for example, a company that we work with called Green Mountain Coffee, which is the largest purchaser of fair trade coffee in the world today. They started with one fair trade product, right? They converted one of their products from Mexico to fair trade. It means that they started buying from a fair trade co-op in Mexico. They put the label on the product, they put it on the shelf. And I talk about this in my book, by the way, and it sold really well. Consumers responded, consumers rewarded them. So then they expanded the line and consumers kept buying more and more of that. The growth rate on their fair trade product line was much greater than the growth rate on the company as a whole. So they saw, and by the way, I took the CEO and founder to Mexico. We visited farmers. We stood with Don Isidro, one of the coffee farmers, who told us about how he studied through the fourth grade. He was so poor that he had to go and work on the family farm after the fourth grade. But that thanks to fair trade, he had been able to keep all four of his kids in school through high school, and two of them had gone on to college. Big deal, big deal. So, the CEO of Green Mountain, he saw the impact. He was inspired and uplifted to keep going. So values matter. And there was a business case. The fair trade line sold more. And today, roughly half of their coffee, not all of it, but roughly half of their coffee is fair trade. What's fair trade has the label on it. If it's not fair trade, it doesn't have the label. But they are the largest purchaser of fair trade coffee in the world. They're having an impact now on tens of thousands of families all over the world. And never once has this company kind of crossed the line and tried to misrepresent them as being greener than they are. They're very honest in saying, we try fair trade. We work with fair trade, but we also work with Rainforest Alliance. We work with organics. We have, an array of different sustainability badges. And that is our holistic approach to sustainability. And I love that. And so, in answer to your question, yes, greenwashing can be a problem, but I don't see it as a major threat to our movement because of the way that we are so protective of credibility and of reputation.
I think one thing which was a very strong aha moment for me was also when you're talking about this, maybe not in the chapter where you were talking about greenwashing specifically, but you were talking about one of the big companies who only certified like a small percentage of their coffee as fair trade. But because it was such a huge company, the amount of coffee that they bought was massive. And for those of you, because I know a lot of mind-body people like the idea of, of all the ethical and God, I'm forgetting this most important word, but of all the ethical ways of doing business. But this book also has a very interesting business case for fair trade and for actually trading with the poorer people in the world. And here I want to ask, another question. So currently it looks, and I know I got this from your book, obviously, when you were talking about one Norwegian company, but currently when we think about fair trade, I think we imagine this poor farmers somewhere in very poor countries with literally nothing else in their life except this option, selling to us, the rich people in the West. Right. But if we're talking about the concept of fair trade, people getting enough money to sustain their livelihoods, then obviously these boundaries have to maybe start disappearing or getting more fuzzy. And also, you didn't mention that in the book, but I was wondering, are fair trade products, or let's say ethical products, are also growing among consumers in, let's say, countries which are considered poorer countries?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, when the pioneers of fair trade many years ago invented this model, the thinking was consumers in the global north, consumers in United States and in Europe had relatively more money. The farmers and the workers around the world, Africa, Asia, Latin America, needed our help. And so it was a north-south relationship. It was trying to link relatively wealthy consumers in the north with relatively poor producers in the south. That's the historic model. What we realized over the years, though, was that in Europe, in the United States, in the wealthy countries, we also have poverty in the agricultural sector and as a whole, right? I mean, here in the US, it's striking. 40% of the farm workers in the United States live below the poverty level. I mean, it breaks my heart. because we have this notion that because the US is a rich nation and because we have laws on the books, that somehow we take care of our farmers and our workers. We don't. It's bullshit, right? There's so much poverty. In Europe, I mean, I've had conversations with European retailers who are very worried about labor in Spain, for example, African immigrant labor picking tomatoes in Spain. And there have been exposés of the labor conditions and the low wages. So we do have problems in Europe, in the United States, and in the wealthy countries. We do have problems with the level of well-being of our workers. And so that is our mission, to lift farmers and workers out of poverty, to give them a chance to lead a better life and to provide a better life for their kids through this market-based model. So it just made sense. And so when we declared fair trade for all as our guiding philosophy, that was part of that vision, that fair trade should come north, as it were, and to be accessible to farms and factories that were willing, number one, to pay their workers more, number two, take care of their workers with better benefits and conditions, and then number three, to open the farm up to an audit. Because here's the problem. The laws on the books in the United States are pretty good in terms of worker rights and worker conditions, but we have no inspectors. So there's no way to verify that farms and factories are obeying the law. And so when a farm or a factory joins the fair trade movement, they have to open themselves up to an annual audit in which independent inspectors come in and talk to the workers and look at the books and verify that that farm is practicing at a higher, more responsible level. And so, there's tremendous need and demand for this service and for this movement, not only in Africa and Asia and Latin America, where you imagine, oh, that's where fair trade works, but also in our countries here. And so what we're seeing is an expansion of the fair trade movement in the global north. And then in answer to your question, Kristina, consumers in the global south, consumers in Mexico City and Mumbai and Buenos Aires and Nairobi, consumers around the world are also starting to develop an interest in sustainability. And there is a consumer segment in all of the countries around the world, a growing middle class that has discretionary income and that is increasingly educated about sustainability and that wants to help. And so we're seeing small but growing fair trade movements among consumers, precisely in typically urban areas where there's a kind of consumer that is gravitating to consumer. So we have gravitating to fair trade. So like Mexico City, for example, or in South Africa and in India and other countries around the world. That's very encouraging to me. We had a meeting with former President Bill Clinton a number of years ago when we launched the Fair Trade for All philosophy, if you will, and he said at that time, you need to think not just about farmers in the developing world, but also about consumers. And so that's what we're seeing. It takes time, but that's what we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. As a hobby farmer from Europe, I've started my farm a few years ago. I can say that even in Europe, where life is quite affluent, it's really hard to make money just by farming. So I guess I know that in European Union, a lot of subsidies are given to the farmers for a very strange reason, to preserve this as a lifestyle.
Yeah.
Which is interesting in my opinion. I had quotes written out, a lot of questions that I never asked because this topic is under discussed in Mind Valley, I think. So if you guys are part of Mind Valley and you think we should talk about, our environment, our sustainability, about ethical practices a little more, I would be very happy to actually think of something, because I feel, as I was reading the book, as I was preparing for this interview, that I would probably have questions for half a day for you. I wanted to finish with one of your quotes, which I really loved, the idea. You said, there may even come a day when third-party ethical sourcing certifications like ours won't be necessary because sustainability is the new normal. I hope so. And I think this is so wonderful because, as I read the book, obviously you talk about your work, but what made me this quote made me feel that it's not about fair trade USA or your organization. It's about solving the problem, and the problem is the enemy, not the the competition. And I did want to ask you this question. It it felt a little bit that even within the community that is trying to promote this new way of capitalism or ethical trade, there is a lot of misunderstanding. But rather than looking for consensus or trying to find the ways to work, sometimes it's a little bit radical and competitive, in a way maybe childish, like slamming the door and leaving and saying, I'm not your friend anymore. Do you have, since you've been in this field so much, do you have any explanation why can't we just join forces and try to solve the problems rather than to teach each other lessons?
Yeah. Mm. I think, Kristina, if we step back and look at the progress that we have made, and then think about where we're headed, it's easy to feel hopeful and indeed to feel optimistic.
Yeah.
So I went to Nicaragua in 1983 and stayed for 11 years. I joined the fair trade movement in 1990 when I was still in Nicaragua. So I've been in this movement for 35 years. And when I started, companies didn't care. There were a few, mission-driven companies, but for the most part, companies didn't care about the impact on farmers and workers and the environment. And consumers, maybe they cared, but they weren't aware. They didn't know how products were sourced and the problems of child labor and exploitation and climate change and all those things. Okay, so that was 1990. Fast forward to today, 35 years. Have we made progress? Hell yes.
Yes.
Companies are increasingly joining. I mean, I interviewed Nespresso for my book. The CEO of Nespresso said, this is becoming the new normal. This will be table stakes, right? This will be required. Sustainability will be required of companies in the future, right? This is a major transnational company saying this. This is not an activist, right? So that's the progress we've made in 30 years. So now I'll think about the next 30 years, right? I mean, in the long arc of history, we are evolving as a society. We're evolving. And, it's not a straight line. We have setbacks. I mean, look at the setbacks politically speaking today, right? So it's not all good news, right? We have to keep going. But I think it's easy to see if this is the progress we've made in the last 30 years, the next 30 years will bring so much progress in terms of how our daily products are sourced, the care for farmers and workers and for the environment, the impact. And that's going to happen not just because business leaders are enlightened, but because they see the business opportunity. They see the business case to make their products more sustainable. And it's going to happen because of you and me. And I love your community. Your community is thoughtful about consciousness. It's thoughtful about intention. And the amazing, uplifting truth is that you and I, with every purchase that we can make a difference. It's a small act of change, but adding it up among millions, among hundreds of millions of people, we have so much power to continue this trajectory of progress in capitalism, and in fact, to pick up the pace and accelerate that. And that's what inspires me, to see the momentum in the consumer movement and to realize that consciousness is not just about waking up and meditating every morning. It's also about bringing that consciousness to the grocery store in the afternoon, right? And so my invitation to our listeners is, the next time you go to the store, to buy your weekly groceries, look for the label. Any label, any sustainability label, fair trade or organics or non-GMO, any sustainability attribute, just slow down for just a second. Doesn't have to be on everything you buy. Just slow down for a second. And on one thing, look for the label. And then when you buy that product, just take a second to think about the family that grew that product, farmers like these, children like these, right? Like there's a farming family living at the bottom of your coffee cup. They're here. Just think about that for just a second. Look for the label, buy the product, think about the impact that you're having, small but real. And then finally, tell someone about it. Share that experience, that sensation, share it with a friend. That's how we build power. That's how we build a movement. That's how we change the world. Very small acts that resonate with our souls, that resonate with our hearts, and then sharing that with the people that we love and giving them a chance to join us.
Thank you for this very uplifting message. And for those of you who are already asking about the book, we are going to leave a link. Incredibly educational. I have also spent some years of my life trying to do good in the world through NGOs, and with that knowledge, I found it very, very interesting, obviously, but also as an entrepreneur, because this insight into the consumers is amazing, literally amazing, because we as consumers, we change so much, and a lot of the things that maybe companies believed about us are not true anymore. But in addition to it being very educational and informative, it's also very uplifting. I find the messages incredibly uplifting, and I do hope that we preserve this beautiful planet for the next generations, not just that the planet is there, but also that the people are happier, and
Yes.
I guess that's conscious, sustainable living is part of that. Now,
Yeah.
traditionally, I want to ask the last question of my guest, but before I do that, also traditionally, I want to ask you, my dear guests, listeners, to leave a heart for my for Paul Rice. Leave your hearts under the video. It still matters. And the last question to Paul, and I know you've been answering that question throughout the whole interview, but I still have to ask that because I ask every guest, how would you like your book to change the world?
Oh. Well, I wrote this book for two people. I wrote this book for entrepreneurs that are trying to find a way for their businesses to be purposeful and impactful in the world, right? And so I wrote this book as a way to provide insights and perhaps to light the path for entrepreneurs like you that are trying to figure out how to have a successful business that also has a positive impact on the world. So I want this book to contribute to that rising tide of conscious capitalists, of conscious business people that are bringing people and planet and profit together. Number one. And number two, I wrote this book also for you, Kristina, the consumer, the thoughtful consumer, the conscious consumer that's trying to figure out, what do all these labels mean? And I feel powerless. What can I do about climate change, right? Well, we as consumers, as everyday ordinary people, we can change the world through the products that we choose. And so my wish with this book is to inspire both business people and everyday consumers to realize our power and to realize that we're part of a rising tide of history, and that we can make a difference. Every purchase matters.
Thank you so much for your book, because I think it's a very necessary conversation for our society. And thank you for joining me at this at this interview. Thank you guys for staying loyal, for coming for our interviews live, and those of you who are watching them and recording, thank you for doing that as well. Thank you, everyone. And yes, I forgot to say, if you're not still signed up to Mind Valley Book Club, do, because we have access to the world's best authors. And see you next week.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much, Kristina. I'm so grateful.